do today. We're going to look at the French colonies in the West Indies. And so we know for some of the colonies in the West Indies, Saint Domingue, Martinique, Guadeloupe, French Guiana, these are some of the colonies. And so we're going to look at the timeline for French emancipation, which is a little bit different. Go ahead.
And so what we did before was only strictly British, right? And then this is a totally different thing.
Yes. So the British is, so we look at British before, right now we're looking at French, and the Spanish is very different. All right. So go ahead.
Sir, so when we're talking about what happened in the French, like France.
Yes. So what was going on in France, in the metropole, when it comes to their emancipation movement. Because when the previous, all that we would have done would have been related to England, right? The British. So one of the first things during the Haitian Revolution, ladies, as you all know, is that in 1794, slavery was abolished in the French West Indies. It was abolished. And then Napoleon would have sent his army in to Saint Domingue to restore slavery. And slavery was restored in 1803. And by 1804, Saint Domingue declared themselves independent and abolished slavery. Now, so we know that they weren't people in this French island or this French territory, Saint Domingue, they were not given freedom, they took it. So we are now left, after Saint Domingue got their freedom, took their freedom, what happened in Martinique, Guadeloupe, and French Guiana?
Everybody start want their freedom again, because you know they're saying, all right, hey, Saint Domingue, get it. I feel I must get it too. So then it starts up there.
And they felt the reason why they were like, oh, we must get freedom to sir is because they felt like the plantation owners are withholding their freedom. So
wasn't that for the British? Or
no, meaning like, you know, them gonna say, oh, Haiti free, something there free, so they want to be free too.
They want to be freed also. And remember that after the Haitian, after Haiti declared themselves independent, people from all over went to Haiti, enslaved people. People from Martinique, enslaved people from Martinique, from Guadeloupe. Ask how them reach. Jamaica, Cuba, Puerto Rico, all over people, enslaved people went to Haiti. While the whites and some of the coloreds went to the other islands. So that was what happened here with Saint Domingue. Now, ladies, in 1818, the French government signed the Anglo-French Rights of Search Agreement. The agreement was between Anglo, mean British. Yes, so it was English. So the agreement was between France and Britain. What was the purpose of it? To stop the illegal trade in Africans. The goal was to abolish the slave trade. Why, based on what you know about the British emancipation process, what was the significance of 1818? Why Britain is going to go to France and said, listen, you need to stop the illegal trade in Africans. Why?
Sir, because wasn't that also the time when the British already gave the abolish the slave trade, so they like entered this agreement with the US, I think, and then
Yes, so they would have abolished this, the British would have abolished the slave trade. That is correct. When they would have abolished the slave trade?
Sir, in 1807.
1807, good. So by 1807, they abolished the slave trade. The next thing that the
maybe they
British
missed
would
out,
have.
get jealous, because you know, sir, maybe I don't know.
All right, go ahead, Bartley.
Oh,
I don't know. So I don't know if this can do anything, but like I was reading and it said that the British had an agreement. I forgot the name. Was like a treaty where they could search each other's ship to see
yeah.
who is trading slave and still carrying slave. But the United States never got into that treaty. It was just the French and the British, I think.
Yes, the United States didn't take part of.
Sir, was that
Was
why they had have the flag on the ships?
each country flies its own. So if a British ships fly the British flag, the US ships fly the US flag, the French ships fly the French flag. And it was illegal for somebody to search another country to search somebody else's ship. So the British and the French signed the agreement to say you can search the ship. Why are you going to search the ship? To see if there's any Africans on board that they are going to trade. Because by 1808, ladies, or 1807, Britain would have abolished the slave trade. By 1815, they would have implemented the registry bill. What was the purpose of the registry bill?
Sir, to
Sir,
register all
to stop the illegal
Yes,
trade of
to
slaves.
register all slaves to stop what?
The
the
illegal
illegal oh,
trade of slaves.
Yes, to stop the illegal trade. So Britain, after 1807, Britain now thought it was her responsibility to go around the world and tell everybody who
that
involved
was
in
what
the
I was gonna
slave.
say.
Yes,
Because
they
I was
thought it
saying,
was the. Go ahead, Miller.
I was saying maybe because they like stopped this abolish the slave trade, so they're going to say no, everybody must follow in their footsteps, you know, that kind of vibe.
Yes, yes, that is so true. And so that is the reason. So Britain now thought it was her responsibility to go and tell everybody in the world that, listen, you need to abolish the slave trade. Oh, we are great humanitarian, we're British,
No.
right?
And them always
So
on top.
yes, so we're above everyone else. You talk about the other nations, we are the great British nation because we abolished the slave trade. And
Sure.
France, you need to abolish it also. Go ahead. All right. So they said that they want it. So they signed the agreement to encourage France to stop the slave trade. By 1817, France said, listen, I tired of Britain with this slave trade thing. So we are going to abolish the slave trade. So in 1817, they said that they are going to abolish the slave trade. They passed the law, but the slave trade was not going to be abolished until 1826. So you passed a law in 1817 to say that you're going to abolish the slave trade, but the slave trade was not abolished until 1826.
Sir, maybe
All
they
right?
were themselves.
Go ahead.
Sir, maybe they were giving themselves some time to get adjusted to all that was gonna take place, you know?
That is true. But to be honest, I believe another reason why, and this is my view, I believe the reason why after the slave trade would have ended in the British colonies, they had to implement a lot of measures in the British colonies to ensure that the lifespan of enslaved people, they were basically extended, right? However, the French didn't want that problem where they could not survive, slavery could not survive in the French colonies without the slave trade. Because the slave trade, once you have enslaved people, remember the lifespan of an enslaved person was like 7 years. And so after 7 years, you always have to replenish your population, your enslaved population. And so abolishing the slave trade meant that you are going to lose a lot of workers. So if the workers don't reproduce naturally, then you're going to have serious, serious problems. And so your business or your plantations could be in a serious problem. Now in Martinique, I want you to look at this. In Martinique, they had slave revolt in 1822, 1823, 1831, and 1834. Why were there slave revolts in these territories, in Martinique during these years? Look at these years. 1822, 1823, 1831, and 1834. Go ahead for me.
That's when like the other, like such as Jamaica in 1831, that's when Jamaica.
Yes. So Jamaica had their slave revolt in 1831. Martinique also had one in 1823. What happened in 1823?
The Demerara revolt.
Demerara slave revolt.
All right, so you realize that even though the islands were separated by sea, the enslaved people knew what was? The enslaved people knew what was going on in the other islands. What was the significance of 1834? Why the enslaved people in Martinique would have had their revolt?
So that was when the apprenticeship.
Apprenticeship would have started in 1834. And so they felt that in the British Islands, slavery was abolished, full. And remember, in some of the islands in the Caribbean that didn't went through apprenticeship, which islands did not went through apprenticeship?
Antigua and Barbuda and the Cayman Islands.
Those islands, so in those islands, the enslaved people had full freedom. And Antigua is and Barbuda is very close to Martinique. Well, it's closer than the Cayman Islands. And so if you know that people in Martinique, in Antigua and Barbuda, they had full freedom, then you're going to say, no man, we need to revolt because we need our freedom too. And so while we had laws, the Emancipation Act was passed in 1834, that you had a period of apprenticeship, and the law also said that the enslaved people would get full freedom by 1834. That was the same period when the French is going to implement the amelioration proposal. So when the British Islands were in the process of ending slavery, that was the time when the French implemented amelioration proposal for the island. Somebody, could you read some of their proposals for me, please?
Sorry, can I read it?
Go ahead for me.
From there, sister, or just the proposals?
The proposals.
Abolition of manumission tax, with registration of all slaves was made compulsory. Branding and mutilation were prohibited. Corporal punishments was limited. Elementary and religious education compulsory.
Very good, thank you. So before that, you used to pay for your
freedom.
Your freedom, but that freedom had a tax to it. And so in their abolition, their amelioration proposal, they would have abolished the emancipation tax. Also, they had to register all of their enslaved people. When the British would have registered their enslaved people, pass a law to register their enslaved people.
In 1850.
1815. And also they would have said, listen, there you cannot brand, you cannot mutilate the enslaved, you cannot also corporal punishment was allowed, but it was limited. But another major thing when it comes to their proposal was that they provided elementary, basic primary education and religious education for the enslaved. So they did little things like reading, teach them how to read, teach them how to write, teach them how to spell, elementary education, and teach them about God. All right? Now, ladies, while this was going on, so the amelioration proposal, they passed the amelioration proposal, and the reason why the amelioration proposal was passed was because of the influence of the British in the 1830s. The British Islands in the 1830s, they came to an end, so they felt that to appease the enslaved people in the French colonies, let us say we are going to improve their condition. Right up to this very moment, ladies, if you realize, there is no discussion about, there is no discussion in these, in the French islands about, or in the metropole about any abolition movement in France. If you realize, there's when the amelioration proposal, no abolition movement in France would have been established by this time. So it was the government who took upon themselves the responsibility to say that, listen, we are going to implement the amelioration proposal to stop the enslaved people, or to appease the enslaved people. All right? So in 1834, ladies, you're going to have a movement that is going to take place in France. And this was at the time when they would have implemented the abolition movement, sorry, the amelioration proposal. And so one of the movement that was established was the Society for the Abolition of Slavery. And this was formed by Victor Sushlo. I believe that's how it is pronounced.
No, sir. Sure.
Yes, Social, something like that. And the French Anti-Slavery Society had no connection with the church. So Victor and the Society of the Abolition of Slavery, they had no connection with the church. While in the British system, there was connection with the church. The Quakers were very instrumental in the formation of these societies. In the French, most of the people were secular. And yes, go ahead.
Sarah would say Church of England, I think its name.
The Church of England to some extent. Yes, you are correct. Now, how Victor gets to be very involved in this movement? So he was born in France in 1804. He was from a merchant family, and his family had business, and they sent him around the Americas between 1829 to 1830. And so he visited places like Mexico, Cuba, and the southern United States. When he returned to France, he realized that, listen, there is really a system that is called slavery. Maybe he heard of it, but he didn't know of the intricate details of slavery. So what he did after that was that he published a lot of writings about abolishing the slavery in the French West Indies. Because of his experience of his visit in Mexico, Cuba, and other places where he saw slavery first, and he said slavery was very brutal. And so he wrote that France should abolish slavery. So he would be the one who would have organized or formed this society, which is the Society for the Abolition of Slavery. And also, he organized a lot of public lectures to educate French people about slavery. And he knew that the British would have been way ahead, because by 1834, when he was doing all of these things, the British anti-slavery societies would have been far advanced. And so he developed very close relationship with the British to ask them for guidance in how to go about abolishing the system of slavery in the French West Indies. These are some of the books that he would have, or materials that he wrote. The first one is Letters from Mexico, the Blacks. So he would have published these letters, and people start to know about the things that were going on in France. He would have also published Black Slavery and Colonial Legislation, The Abolition of Slavery, Critical Examination of Prejudice Against the Color of Africans and Half-Breeds, French Colonies' Immediate Abolition of Slavery, Foreign Colonies and Haiti, Results of English Emancipation. So right here in this article, he would have mentioned that, listen, the English emancipation and French 80s emancipation has a lot of influence on the French West Indies. And the next one was the history of slavery for the last 2 years. So he was very much involved. You know what about Victor? He wasn't a Christian. He wasn't a Christian, but based on his trip to the Americas, and he saw the conditions of Black people in these places, he took upon himself the responsibility to end slavery. And also another thing that he did, ladies, was that he advocated to the French Parliament to end slavery. Ladies, you see, I'm speaking a lot about Victor. You know, one of the reasons why? Because they usually ask this question in the exam. How he would have led the French colonies or influenced the French colonies to abolish slavery. Remember in 1834, when he would have started his abolition movement. That was the same year that the French government would have implemented the amelioration proposal. He had nothing to do with the amelioration proposal. Before that, ladies, nobody in France cared about the abolition of slavery. It was through his visit to the Americas, his letters and his books that he wrote, his public lectures, he developing close connection with the British anti-slavery societies. He advocating to the French Parliament about ending slavery, that led to the French abolishing slavery in the French West Indies. Now, another thing, ladies, one of the first major thing accomplishment that he did was that by 1836, a law was passed that any slave setting foot in France must be freed. What was the similarity with the British? What was the similarity with the British?
And the babies were born free?
Sir, slaves under 6 years old should be freed?
No.
Sir,
Is it the
One second,
Mansfield.
ladies. Read this for me, please. 1836. What happened in 1836? A law was passed.
That any slave setting foot in France must be freed.
Must be freed. Did a law similar or a ruling similar to that was passed in?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
The one with the children.
Sir, was the Mansfield judgment.
The Mansfield judgment. So the same thing when with the Mansfield judgment, where it said any person, slavery was not recognized in Britain, but for this one, it said any slave setting foot in France must be free. So it very simple. You realize that the British were way ahead than the French.
Sir, that's why they were forcing them to follow them, you know?
Yes, that was the reason. Now, ladies, by 1838, the French, not the Abolition Society, they drafted a bill and they said to Parliament, this is a bill to end slavery, but Parliament would have rejected that bill. Why they rejected that bill? Because of the French West India interest. The French West India interest was the one.
They're everywhere.
Yes, the French West India interest. They said that, listen, we are not going to abolish slavery. Don't come to us with that. But by 1838, ladies, the British abolished the slave trade. So if you realize that the French is trying to, the Abolition Society is trying to play catch up with the British. My question to you, what will be the impact of the French West Indies once the British abolish slavery?
They are going to want to abolish it as well.
Yes, they are going to want to abolish it as well, but what else?
So I think the slaves are going to revolt more because they're saying people in British are free.
Very good. So you're going to have slave revolt. Thank you very much.
What I was thinking is like, it's like a race. It's almost like a race between the what do I call it? Between the British and the French and the Spanish. So I think it would be almost like a race to see who can.
Remember, I know so listen up now, ladies. The French Abolition Society, they were the ones who wanted slavery to come to an end. Victor and his crew, not the French people, not the French West India interest. So there are two battles going on. One, which one would have been the pro-slavery group?
The French West India interest.
Which one would be the anti-slavery group in France?
The French Abolition
Society. Very good. So that is it. Now, all of you would have mentioned what would have been the influence or the impact on the French West Indies. One, it was mentioned, Banton mentioned that there was going to be, the slaves are going to revolt because they're going to say, how is that with the British people on the British island slavery abolished? What about us? Next, another impact that somebody would have mentioned was that they are going to try to play, basically try to meet the same timeline as the British. And also another reason, ladies, another impact that is going to happen is that the French slaves are going to escape to the British Islands. You hear freedom happening in the British Islands, you're not going to, if you're an enslaved in the French territories, you're not going to run to the British Islands. Anywhere the boat leave, anytime the boat leaving, I have to leave too. So they would have escaped from the French islands to the British islands. And so ladies, by 1848, slavery was abolished in the French West Indies. But at the time when slavery was abolished in 1848, the French West India interest said, listen, since you love to follow the British, why not have a apprenticeship period? But Victor rejected apprenticeship and said, no, there's not going to be any apprenticeship. You must have immediate abolition.
So, sir.
Go ahead.
Sir, so we can say that the French were very proactive, like, especially Victor, sir. He didn't want to, you see, he was so much so for the slaves' freedom that he didn't want anything really to, like, prolong, the process. So he just immediately did it, you know what I mean? While the
Yes.
British, sir, they took their time. Because in truth and in fact, they were the first, right, sir? So there was, like, nothing to really, like with Victor, they could look on the British and say how them do this and that. The British, they were going off their own instinct.
They were doing their own experiment.
Yes. They knew. So now that when their turn came around, quote unquote, Sir Victor just said, no apprenticeship, just freedom. That's it. Whatever costs, we will figure that out after. Just freedom, like.
And then very good. And then Victor would have had the same. Experience. I would have heard that, listen, apprenticeship was a scam in the British colonies.
True that.
Go ahead for me, Lawrence.
Oh. Sir, I was saying that in 1848, the French government, the king actually was overthrown, so they got a new republic, and
Yes.
Victor was the head of the commission, so he was, and the new republic was actually against slavery too, so they were, willing to work with Victor to, abolish slavery. So that's another reason why that whole thing.
Very good, very good. Bartley, you have something to say?
Sir, I was going to ask if Victor was like involved with a like a slave or something, cause the last time we saw with the church with the Spanish incoming or whatever, is the man got to the council and said, oh, look at this, but we were thinking he was gonna have a little love for a little indigenous sister. You think Victor was like have a little feel for a black woman or something?
It could be, but I believe that a stronger point for me is that I believe that because he was a merchant and he was involved in trading, he believed that industrialization was a better way for the French economy than the system of slavery.
Oh, slavery.
All right, ladies. Now, when we look at the French Emancipation Act, just like the British, the planters were compensated 120 million francs. Please note the amount. All enslaved people.
All of them together?
No, this was the 120 million francs was divided for all the French planters. Oh. Just like the 20 million pound was divided among all the British planters. And they had no period of apprenticeship.
Sir, pounds were worth more than francs?
At the time, and maybe still for today. Now, ladies, some of the reasons why slavery was for the abolition of slavery in the French West Indies. One, the role of Victor. He would have formed the Anti-Slavery Society. He published his articles. He made representation to the French government. He did his public lectures. The next one, the rise of beet sugar in France. Beet sugar replaced cane sugar in France. And beet sugar growers supported the abolition of slavery. Why I believe beet sugar growers supported the abolition of slavery?
Sir.
Go ahead.
Because at the time, the plantations, they were run based on cane sugar. So the beet sugar, they were like the cane sugar people, the planters, sir, they took over everything from them. So they were like literally just on the back burner. So they wouldn't really have anything to lose if slavery was abolished.
All right, but you don't find that the beet sugar, if I go into beet sugar, right, and I realize that cane sugar depends on slave labor, right? Remember, in fact, I have to pay my workers. If I pay my workers in France for beet sugar, that means my cost of production is going to be way more than cane sugar, which use free labor.
Oh, so the beet sugar planters, they paid their workers, but the cane sugar ones, they had free labor. So that's why I said they wouldn't really have anything to lose. Plus, it would be better for them because it kind of level the playing ground. The cane sugar planters don't have no more free labor. They have to go start pay. So pay.
Very good, and that means both the price of beet sugar and cane sugar could be on the same
level.
Very good, very good. Keep it up. Another reason, as historians argue, the slaves were the ones who abolished slavery. And so they had a lot of slave revolt. And also the experience of British emancipation would have led to the abolition of slavery in the French West Indies, because the British would have abolished slavery in 1838, and a lot of the enslaved Africans from the French colonies would have migrated, and so they would have lost a lot of workers. And we cannot ignore the work of the anti-slavery movement in France. They had no connection. Oh, sorry. So these are the reasons why the abolition of slavery was, abolished in the French West Indies, and now the reasons why it was delayed. So one reason why it was delayed, because they didn't get any support from the Catholic Church, and their numbers, the anti-slavery movement number, was very weak. Most of the burden was on Victor and his group, and so they never had much. The planters in the French colonies, they rejected the end of the slave trade and slavery. They didn't support it. And another reason, the sugar industry was very prosperous. Why the sugar industry was prosperous for the French planters in the West Indies? Because British planters would have abolished slavery, and so they still had slavery and free labor, while in the British colonies, most of the enslaved people would have left the plantation. So most of the British sugar industry was on a decline because they didn't have free labor. And so the French now, their sugar was cheaper and it was in greater abundance. And so this was one of the reasons why it was declined. Because once the British end slavery, they start to prosper. And another thing was that the slave revolts did little damage. Once the slave revolts happened, it was easily suppressed in the French colonies. And so these were some of the reasons why it was delayed. Now, ladies, always remember reasons why French emancipation was delayed, reason why it was abolished. All right, the role of Victor. All right, ladies, these are some very important points, and know the French colonies in the Caribbean.
When we all need to know those four.
Yes, these four. Now, ladies, when we meet on Monday, the first 30 minutes, we're going to do the presentations, and then we are going to do Spanish emancipation. And then on Tuesday, you're going to meet with your groups, and you're going to do the comparison with your group between French, British, and Spanish. And the next class, which is the Thursday's class, we are going to look at, you're going to do those presentations. So far from this, you would have seen some of the similarities and the differences. All right, ladies, enjoy the rest of the day.
Goodbye, sir.
All
Bye,
right, good.
sister.
Bye, sir.
And I put these in the PowerPoint in the group already.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, can you also ensure that like you put the like the schedule, because so that like I won't forget.
All right, ladies, bye-bye.
Bye bye, sir.